When I was a teenager, my close group of friends were, I guess, what you'd call delinquents. We liked causing trouble, breaking rules, and messing around in places we didn't belong. I grew up in a suburb in northern New Jersey, so I guess you could say we were just spoiled kids with nothing better to do. Looking back, the way we passed the time was a little silly, but there's nothing I can do about that now. Anyway, one of the things we really liked to do was to go exploring in the late hours of the night. Usually we explored abandoned buildings, but not always. We actually got banned from our middle school after jumping through an open window, but that's a story for another time. This particular night, we were planning on executing a riskier task. There were 5 of us: me, Chip, Jason, Rowan, and Anish. Rowan had a tendency to bounce around from job to job, which was kind of a running joke in our squad. He'd lose jobs as quickly as he'd get them, usually for the dumbest reasons you can imagine. He had just picked up a gig as an attendant at a bowling alley a few towns over from us. I'm sure you could see where this is going. He had been entrusted the key to close up the place the night before. Anish was a master of persuasion, and he somehow convinced Rowan to let us explore the bowling alley at like 3 a.m. I'm telling you, Anish could convince someone to give them their kidney. That's how persistent he was. I haven't heard from him in a while. I think he might actually be in jail right now. Anyway, the 5 of us agreed to get a little drunk before going. We all had a substantial amount to drink except for Jason, who refused to go anywhere unless he was the one driving. His dad had a really nice BMW, and Jason liked being able to end our links when he got tired. After getting a little buzzed, James drove the 5 of us to the location. I was the heavy drinker of the squad. It's not something I'm proud of, but it's just who I was at that point in my life. Because of this, I usually took things a little less seriously than I should have, especially when it came to dangerous or risky situations. Rowan unlocked the door, and the 5 of us made our way inside. Chip was usually the most cautious, and he kept chiding us to be careful in his hilariously high-pitched voice. Rowan told us we couldn't actually do any bowling right now, which we were all a little upset about. I had the genius idea of doing some makeshift sliding on the lanes as if they were slip-and-slides. Since we were drunk, this was actually pretty fun. The 5 of us soon tired ourselves out and decided we wanted to do some exploring. We asked Rowan if there were any back rooms we could check out, and he told us there were. We made our way into the employee-only area, and Rowan led us to some kind of storage room. We started poking around and flipping things over, just being stupid and careless. We figured Rowan was going to get fired anyway, so we weren't too concerned with messing things up. As we started getting bored, we heard a deafening bump from below us. The 5 of us froze, staring at each other. Jason, the only sober one in the group, asked if the place had a basement. Rowan looked just as shocked as we were, and told that he had no prior knowledge of a potential basement. Anish grinned, eager to continue exploring. Chip seemed really nervous, telling us that we were probably going to end up getting Rowan fired. We were whispering now, arguing whether we wanted to go look for this hypothetical basement. Just then, Jason lifted the edge of a rug nestled in the corner, revealing a hatch. We were shocked. The atmosphere in the room instantly shifted with the realization that the situation was now serious. Even if we had found the way into the basement, the sound we heard was still unexplained.
I don't think any of us really wanted to go down there, but Jason made the first move in his classic level-headed style. He flung the latch open and stared down at the old, rusted ladder leading into the darkness. "Screw this," whispered Chip,
motioning for us to leave. Jason ignored him and went for the stairs. He pulled out his phone and shined the flashlight into the blackness. Without another word, he descended into the abyss. I could tell Rowan, Anish, and Chip were a little scared, understandably. I still had a lot of liquid confidence, so I decided I'd go next. Anish followed behind me and Rowan brought up the rear. Chip refused to come down with us. The 4 of us pulled out our phone flashlights and began exploring the basement that had been hidden for some reason. It was filled with dust and cardboard boxes, stacked up to the ceiling. There was nothing else down there, or at least that's what we originally thought. Anish noticed a door in the corner, and we walked over to it. Jason put his hand on the handle, but a split second before he was going to open it, we heard a distinctive bump come from the other side, which sounded identical to the one we heard earlier. We looked around at each other, with horrified looks on our faces. I could tell we were all thinking the same thing. An animal, maybe? No shot, it was too loud to be an animal. I was pretty freaked out at this point and turned away to leave. Like an idiot, Jason cracked the door open, revealing another storage room. That's not all that was in there, though. In the corner of the room, there was a human figure sitting on the ground with its legs crossed, facing away from us. We were frozen in place, utterly terrified. After a full minute of stagnance, the person in the corner of the room banged their head against the wall, explaining the sounds we had been hearing. They began tiptoeing to the ladder, careful not to make any noise. The rest of my friends turned around and began doing the same, clearly filled with terror. Just then, Rowan tripped on a piece of junk on the floor and then cursed. The person in the room yelled and we ran. Jason and I were up the ladder in a split second, with Anish close behind. Chip was leaned over the hatch, concerned with what he was hearing. Anish made it up and the three of us ran out of the room. We heard Rowan scream, "Get off me," but Anish and Jason were too terrified to turn back. I ran back into the room and saw Chip chucking a metal pipe down the hatch, which was followed by a demonic scream. Rowan scrambled on the ladder and Chip grabbed his wrist, yanking him up. Rowan ran toward me while Chip slammed the hatch shut. The five of us sprinted out of the bowling alley, and Rowan hastily locked the door with trembling hands. Jason drove us back with a blank look on his face. We listened as Rowan described what happened after the rest of us made it up the ladder. Apparently, whoever had been in the basement jumped on Rowan's back, clawing at him. Chip came to his rescue and nailed Rowan's attacker in the head with that pipe, causing the lunatic to fall backward. Rowan said he only saw the guy's face for a split second. It was the horrifying face of a dirty, old, homeless-looking guy with a bird's nest of hair on his head. Rowan ended up quitting the next day without giving his boss an explanation, as it was definitely illegal what we had done. To this day, we have no idea how that guy could have gotten down there. Maybe there was an alternate entrance we had overlooked. Either way, the basement had been intentionally hidden, which tells me that Rowan's boss might have known something about the whole thing. This experience ruined my taste for bowling, which I have not done since. One night, my girlfriend Rebecca and I decided it would be fun to go bowling. We drove to the closest bowling alley and went through the whole process of renting shoes, finding balls, and picking a lane. We both were really bad. Neither of us had been bowling in many years. We paid for an hour of bowling. Rebecca wasn't really enjoying it too much because she kept getting gutter balls. I was doing better than her, but not by much, so I wasn't really able to help her out much. And then to make matters even worse, Rebecca's ex-boyfriend arrived with his group of friends and they started bowling a few lanes down from us. Rebecca looked away, refusing to even look in that direction, whispering at me that we need to leave now. We packed it up early and left. She went to the car and waited while I returned the shoes. I think her ex spotted me while I was at the front counter, and I looked away. I didn't tell Rebecca this, though. We went home and agreed to play Wii bowling instead and have some wine. That sounded much more fun anyway. When we got home, the first thing I did was turn on the Wii and open a bottle of wine. The bowling alley trip was a failure, but I didn't want Rebecca to be unhappy. We played Wii bowling for like half an hour with music on in the background and drinking wine. It turned out to be much more fun than the bowling alley. Until the current song that was playing ended, and we heard something come from upstairs in that brief moment of silence. Rebecca and I looked at each other, telling me she heard it too. I turned off the music for good, but now there was just silence. The sound we heard could best be described as a heavy object being dropped on the floor. I went upstairs to investigate. I checked every bedroom with the lights on. I checked under every bed. I was relieved to find nothing. I wasn't actually expecting to find someone in the house, but naturally, you do need to go investigate if you hear a suspicious sound in your house. Still, I wondered what actually made the sound because I didn't find anything on the floor. After maybe another half an hour of playing Wii bowling, we brought our little wine party upstairs to the bedroom, and eventually we fell asleep. Rebecca's a lightweight, so she got much drunker than me, which explains why I was the one to wake up in the middle of the night and not her. I heard what woke me up, though. It was another clear and distinct sound of something heavy being dropped from above. But the only thing is, now we were upstairs, and yet the sound still came from above. So what else would be above us? The attic. The attic door is right outside my bedroom door. It's It's one of those doors with a string that you pull down and a metal ladder comes down. I tiptoed out of the bedroom to not wake up Rebecca. I stood under the attic door and listened. Every 5 seconds or so, I heard the slightest creaking sound, like from the weight of something moving around. I didn't want to scare Rebecca, but I'd heard of animals getting into people's attics sometimes. I went to get a broom from the closet to use as a possible weapon if I were to have to fend off an animal. Then I quietly pulled the attic door open and climbed up. I stopped at the top of the ladder in the darkness and listened. I heard creaking. It was the creaking of the wooden rocking chair we had up there. I used my phone as a light to reveal the rocking chair. There was someone sitting in it, slowly rocking. I nearly fell off the ladder. I wanted to go run back to Rebecca and hide. I wanted to do anything but approach this person. But I gathered the courage to yell, "Who are you?" The rocking stopped, and the man turned around to look at me. He started making this animalistic, gargling, growling sound. Then he got up, and that's when I hurried down the ladder and pushed the attic door up. I screamed for Rebecca to call the cops until I heard her acknowledge me. I stayed under the attic door, preventing it from being opened as the man in the attic tried kicking the door open. He eventually stopped, and I heard the deranged laughter of a sick, mentally ill person. He spoke in another language. It sounded Russian. I felt like my arms were going to fall off, holding up the attic door, waiting for the police. When they finally arrived, Rebecca went downstairs to let them in. From here, it was the job of the police officers to go up there and remove the man. Rebecca and I waited in the living room, sitting on the couch next to each other, until we saw them bringing the man out through the living room to the front door in handcuffs. The way the man looked at me said everything. He was a dangerous, mentally ill person. His stare was full of hatred and craziness, with the hint of confusion. His lip contorted in this bizarre way that would almost make you think he were drunk. Whatever happened with him, we don't know. We didn't press civil charges, but I'm sure he was charged criminally if they didn't deem him to be insane. This happened in the summertime when we keep the windows open, and so it was most likely that he squeezed through one of the windows in the backyard. I'm not sure why he picked our house. We may just have been the unlucky house he stumbled across. I used to go bowling quite often with my friends when I was young. I'm talking like 12, 13. There was a bowling alley down the block from my friends and I, and so we'd go there on weekends. The bowling alley has been closed for years, but when it was open, it was super cheap and affordable, perfect for a bunch of young teenagers who didn't have money of their own. This one weekend, I went with my friends Jacob, Josh, and Mikey to the bowling alley. We always went at night. It was likely around 8 p.m. The bowling alley was always crowded on the weekends, and sometimes we'd see familiar faces. There was this older man who would sometimes be there alone, bowling on the adult side of the bowling alley where alcohol was served. We always played on the non-alcoholic side. How we took notice to that man was because he'd sometimes just weirdly walk down the entire bowling alley, passing every lane, watching people bowling. Then we'd notice him end up back at his lane all by himself. We nicknamed him Creeper Bob after maybe the third time seeing him. Tonight there was a lane open next to us, and guess who out of nowhere sat next to us? Bob, or whatever his real name was, but I'll keep referring to him as Bob. He was setting up a game on the lane next to us by himself, and it wasn't long until he started trying to talk to us. He started making comments on our form, and every so often interrupting our conversation to tell us weird things like how long he's been coming here. Then eventually he said something really weird, that he watches us play every weekend from across the bowling alley, and he decided to come over and introduce himself tonight. He played it off like he was trying to be some kind of bowling teacher to us, but really it was just annoying and most of all uncomfortable. Bob at one point entered our lane as I was up to bowl, and he grabbed my wrist with his hands to position me into an allegedly better form. I never gave him permission to touch me, nor did I ask for his guidance. We were only like 13 though. None of us stood up and said, "Yo, get lost," or something like that. I could just feel the unease amongst my friends. Every moment of that man touching me, I felt more and more disgusted. We cut our night at the bowling alley short because of him. We used the money that we would have used on more games on getting pizza instead at a pizza place further out the block. When we came out, Jacob and Mikey went their own way since they lived on a different block. Josh and I walked back down the other way in the direction of our houses. As we did, The sound of a car engine starting made us turn around. We noticed an old SUV like a Ford Explorer banging a three-point turn. We both imagined the possibility of it being Creeper Bob. The SUV started slowly tailing us as we walked down the street, so we picked up our pace. Then the SUV pulled up right alongside us, and the window rolled down. It was in fact the man from the bowling alley. He said out the window that he could offer us a ride home. We said no thanks. He replied it's not safe for a couple kids to be walking around late at night. We weren't even really that young. We were young teenagers, not little kids. And it was crazy that he thought we were young enough to trick into getting into a car. When we made it clear we weren't getting in, he pulled to the side of the road and parked his car. Josh and I decided to start jogging home. When we reached the intersection where we'd split off, we said bye and I continued jogging home. By the time I made it back, I was out of breath. Running after eating pizza is not a good idea. My dad was already asleep because he worked weekends. My mom was out with her girlfriends most likely, and the same was probably the case with my sister. So I wasn't supposed to ring the bell because my dad didn't want to be woken up. I went around back to get the key we had for the back door, which was hidden in the shed. When I got out from the shed, I thought I heard something, and I should have listened to my gut. I went to the back door to unlock it, and as I opened the door, I heard the sound of someone running up behind me. Before I could fully turn around, someone pushed me inside the house, covering my mouth and wrapping their arm around my neck. I wasn't able to see who it was because I couldn't turn my head. I scratched and clawed at the man's hand until I could move my mouth just enough out of the grip of his hand and screamed, "Dad." I may have only been 13, but I was able to put up enough of a fight to get him to lose his grip a few times, allowing me to scream. This undoubtedly scared him off as he finally let go for good and ran outside. I didn't look back. I ran up the half flight of stairs to the main floor and yelled for my dad. My dad came rushing out of his room, and after telling him what just happened, he checked the backyard and all around the property and then came back inside. I told him about the man from the bowling alley, how we nicknamed him Creeper Bob, how he followed Josh and I in his SUV after admitting to stalking us at the bowling alley. My dad filed a police report and tried getting the bowling alley to release the video surveillance from that night, but they refused. I was never allowed to go back there after my mom found out about this. Not that I'd ever want to. The crazy thing is, technically I can't say with 100% certainty that the man who came in behind me and grabbed me was the man from the bowling alley. But realistically, how slim are the chances that it wasn't him? It was a Friday night, and the lights of the city were dimming as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and the streets were alive with the hustle and bustle of people looking for a good time. Among them was a group of friends, eager to kick off their weekend with some bowling fun. Michael, Sarah, David, and Emily had been friends since childhood, and every Friday night, without fail, they would meet up at their favorite bowling alley, just strikes and spares. The alley was an old establishment, with flickering neon lights and the smell of stale popcorn lingering in the air. But to the four friends, it was a second home. As they entered the alley, they were greeted by the familiar sight of the polished lanes and the sound of crashing pins. The atmosphere was buzzing with excitement as people cheered on their friends and rivals alike. "All right, who's up for a game?" Michael exclaimed, his eyes sparkling with anticipation. The others nodded eagerly, and soon they were lacing up their bowling shoes and selecting their balls. As they took their turns, laughter filled the air, and for a brief moment, all was right with the world. It was during Michael's turn that things took a chilling turn. As he approached the lane, he felt a sudden chill run down his spine, and a feeling of unease washed over him. Ignoring it, he took his stance and prepared to throw the ball. But just as he released it, he heard a faint whisper echoing in his ears. It was so soft he could barely make out the words, but they sent a shiver down his spine. "Hey, beware." Startled, Michael stumbled, and the ball veered off course, missing the pins entirely. He glanced around, but the other lanes were empty, and his friends were too engrossed in their own games to notice anything amiss. Shaking off the strange feeling, Michael returned to his friends, but the unease lingered in the back of his mind. As the night wore on, the feeling of unease continued to plague Michael. Every time he approached the lane, he couldn't shake the sensation that he was being watched. It was as if someone, or something, was lurking in the shadows, just out of sight. Determined not to let it ruin their evening, Michael tried to push the feeling aside and focus on having fun with his friends. But as the games progressed, the atmosphere in the alley grew increasingly tense, and the once lively chatter was replaced by an eerie silence. It was during a particularly intense game between Sarah and David that the strange occurrences reached a terrifying crescendo. As Sarah lined up her shot, a sudden gust of wind swept through the alley, extinguishing the overhead lights and plunging them into darkness. At first, there was nothing but confusion and fear as they groped blindly in the dark, but then they heard it, the sound of soft footsteps echoing in the silence. Heart pounding, Michael reached for his phone, using its dim light to guide them to safety. But as the light illuminated the alley, what they saw made their blood run cold. Standing at the end of the lane was a figure cloaked in shadows, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. It was tall and slender, with long, bony fingers that seemed to stretch out towards them. Frozen in fear, they watched as the figure slowly advanced towards them, its movements smooth and unhurried. They tried to scream, but their voices caught in their throats, and all they could do was watch in horror as it drew closer and closer. Just when it seemed that all hope was lost, a voice broke through the darkness, cutting through the silence like a knife. "Get out. Leave this place at once." It was the voice of an old man, filled with authority and power. And as his words echoed through the alley, the figure recoiled, its glowing eyes dimming with fear. Without hesitation, Michael and his friends fled from the alley, their hearts pounding with terror. As they burst out into the cool night air, they looked back one last time, but the figure was gone, swallowed up by the darkness. As they huddled together outside the alley, trying to catch their breath, Michael and his friends couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung over them like a dark cloud. What had they just witnessed? And who was the mysterious old man who had saved them from certain doom? It was then that David remembered a story he had heard as a child. A story about the legend of Strikes and Scares. According to the legend, Strikes and Scares was built on the site of an old graveyard, and the spirits of the restless dead still haunted the alley to this day. Over the years, there had been countless reports of strange happenings, disembodied voices, flickering lights, and even sightings of ghostly apparitions. But the most terrifying part of the legend was the tale of the old man who had once owned the alley. He had been a powerful sorcerer, skilled in the dark arts, and it was said that he had made a deal with the devil himself to ensure the success of his business. But the deal had come at a terrible price, and now his soul was bound to the alley for all eternity, doomed to wander its halls as a vengeful spirit. As David recounted the story, a chill ran down Michael's spine. Could it be true? Had they come face to face with the ghost of the old sorcerer? Determined to uncover the truth, Michael and his friends vowed to return to Strikes and Scares and confront the spirits that lurked within its walls. Little did they know, they were about to embark on a journey that would take them to the very edge of sanity. It was with a mixture of fear and determination that Michael and his friends returned to Strikes and Scares the following night. The alley was deserted, its neon lights casting eerie shadows on the empty lanes. As they made their way inside, they could feel the weight of the darkness pressing down on them, suffocating and oppressive. But they refused to let fear hold them back, steeling themselves for whatever horrors lay ahead. They began their investigation in earnest, scouring every corner of the alley for any sign of paranormal activity. But despite their efforts, the alley remained eerily quiet, as if the spirits were lying in wait, biding their time. It wasn't until they reached the old manager's office that they found what they were looking for. Tucked away in a dusty corner was a collection of ancient tomes and arcane artifacts, relics of a time long past. As they pored over the items, they discovered a journal belonging to the old sorcerer himself. It was filled with cryptic writings and arcane symbols, detailing his descent into madness and his eventual pact with the devil. But as they delved deeper into the journal, they uncovered a horrifying truth. The old sorcerer had been conducting dark rituals in an attempt to summon a powerful demon, one that would grant him untold power and wealth. And now, centuries later, his spirit still roamed the alley, bound by the same dark magic that had doomed him to his fate. Armed with this new knowledge, Michael and his friends knew that they had to act fast if they were to put an end to the curse that plagued Strikes and Scares. But confronting a vengeful spirit was no easy task, and they would need all the help they could get if they were to succeed. Drawing on their courage and determination, they prepared themselves for the final showdown, gathering whatever weapons and charms they could find to aid them in their battle against the darkness. As they entered the alley once more, they could feel the presence of the spirits all around them, swirling and pulsating with malevolent energy. But they refused to be intimidated, pressing forward with steely resolve. Their journey led them to the heart of the alley, where they found the old sorcerer's final resting place, a hidden chamber deep beneath the lanes, concealed from prying eyes. With bated breath, they descended into the darkness, their hearts pounding with anticipation. And there, in the depths of the earth, they came face to face with the source of all their fear. The old sorcerer stood before them, his eyes burning with rage and hatred. But Michael and his friends were not alone. With the help of the old man who had saved them before, they unleashed a barrage of spells and incantations, driving the sorcerer back with the power of their combined will. In the end, it was not brute force that defeated the sorcerer, but the strength of their friendship and the power of their belief in each other. With one final incantation, they banished the sorcerer's spirit back to the depths of hell, sealing the alley against the forces of darkness once and for all. As they emerged from the depths of strikes and scares, weary but triumphant, Michael and his friends knew that they had faced their fears and emerged victorious. And though the memory of that fateful night would haunt them for the rest of their days, they could take comfort in the knowledge that they had overcome the darkness and emerged stronger for it. In the quaint town of Willow Creek, nestled amidst rolling hills and thick forests, there stood a bowling alley unlike any other. The Willow Creek Lanes, as it was known, had a reputation that whispered tales of the supernatural. Some said it was cursed, while others dismissed it as mere superstition. But for me, Lily Evans, it was about to become a night I would never forget. It was a chilly autumn evening when my friends and I decided to visit the Willow Creek Lanes. We were a group of 5, filled with excitement and laughter as we made our way through the dimly lit streets towards our destination. The bowling alley loomed ahead, its neon sign flickering eerily against the night sky. As we entered, the smell of stale popcorn and disinfectant filled the air. The sound of balls rolling down the lanes and pins crashing echoed through the building, creating a strangely comforting ambience. We secured our shoes and selected our lanes, eager to begin our game. The first few frames passed by in a blur of laughter and friendly competition. But as the night wore on and the lanes emptied, a sense of unease settled over us. It was subtle at first, a feeling of being watched, of shadows lurking just beyond the edge of vision. I brushed off my unease as mere paranoia, attributing it to the eerie atmosphere of the bowling alley. But as the game progressed, the feeling only intensified. It was as though something unseen was closing in on us, something ancient and malevolent. It was during the 7th frame that things took a sinister turn. As I stepped up to take my turn, I felt a sudden chill run down my spine. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I glanced towards the far end of the alley. There, standing amidst the shadows, was a figure unlike anything I had ever seen. It was tall and gaunt, its features obscured by darkness. But its eyes burned with a cold, unearthly light that sent shivers down my spine. I blinked, convinced it was a trick of the light or a figment of my imagination. But when I looked again, the figure was gone, vanished into thin air like a wisp of smoke. I tried to shake off the encounter, to focus on the game at hand, but the feeling of dread lingered like a heavy fog. My friends noticed my unease and exchanged worried glances, but no one spoke of the shadowy figure that had appeared. As the game drew to a close, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. The air felt thick and suffocating, as though something sinister lurked just beyond the edge of perception. I could feel eyes on me, watching, waiting. And then, it happened. As I prepared to take my final shot, a sudden gust of wind swept through the alley, extinguishing the overhead lights in a cascade of darkness. Panic erupted amongst my friends as we were plunged into total blackness. Heart pounding, I fumbled for my phone, using its feeble light to illuminate the alley. But what I saw froze the blood in my veins. The figure from before stood before me, its eyes blazing with an otherworldly fury. I screamed, a sound drowned out by the howling wind that filled the alley. My friends cried out in terror as the figure advanced, its form shifting and contorting with each step. It was no longer human, if it ever had been. It was something far older, far darker. With trembling hands, I reached for the nearest exit, desperate to escape the nightmare unfolding before me. But as I turned to flee, I felt a cold hand close around my wrist, pulling me back with an iron grip. I looked up to see the figure looming over me, its face inches from mine. Its breath was like ice against my skin as it whispered words that chilled me to the core. "You cannot escape," ere it hissed, its voice a rasping whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You are mine now, bound to this place for all eternity." With a strength born of sheer terror, I wrenched myself free and stumbled towards the exit, my friends close behind. We burst out into the cool night air, gasping for breath as though we had just emerged from the depths of hell itself. But even as we fled into the safety of the night, I could feel the shadowy presence of the bowling alley lingering behind us, a reminder of the horrors that lurked within its walls. To this day, I cannot set foot in a bowling alley without feeling the icy grip of fear tightening around my heart. And though I have tried to forget the events of that fateful night, the memory of the figure in the shadows haunts my dreams, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the edge of our reality.